What's up, folks? Nate here at Tool Dyno Works. I'm back on the dyno today going over the aftermarket exhaust systems we have tested so far on our 25 Ninja 1100 and the huge performance improvements that they provide with proper tuning. As you can see there, we've got an Acura exhaust on the bike. We don't just have a slip-on on it though, we actually have the full system. Everything has been replaced, and we were only able to do that because, as we suspected, it all fits from the outgoing Ninja 1000. That's right, it all bolts right up. Nothing needed to be modified or changed. We ordered a full Acura from the 2020 plus Ninja 1000 generation that has now been replaced by these 1100s, and it all fits perfectly. You can't just throw it on there though and not have problems, but we'll get to that in just a second. Now, just for a quick recap, this is what the bike made in bone stock configuration here on our dyno after we were done with break-in. Again, this is the stock exhaust, stock tuning, made just under 125 horsepower and about 77.5 pound-feet of torque to the tire on pump gas. And with proper tuning for the stock setup, we already saw some pretty darn significant gains. At wide open throttle with proper tuning and the stock exhaust still installed, the bike picked up about 5 horsepower at the peak, way more than that, almost 10 by the time you get to 10,000 RPMs, and about 3 foot-pounds of torque pretty much everywhere. Now, the gains at wide open throttle actually weren't the most shocking or important part of getting this bike properly tuned and dialed in, but I've already covered that in a different video, so if you haven't seen that, go look at the last video we posted about our Ninja 1100 tuning. We dive into all of that much more in depth there. The long and the short of it is, the bike feels massively smoother and stronger than it ever did before with proper tuning in place for the stock system. Now, once we got that done, we did start off with just the Acura slip-on with the stock headers. I don't have it on the bike that way right now, but I did actually take a quick video of a run with it in that configuration just so you can see what it sounded like if you're at all curious. And with just a slip-on installed and our updated fuel mapping for the new airflow needs of the slip-on, there was actually some pretty good gains. We picked up about 2 horsepower at the peak, but way more than that through the mid-range there. You can see the green line there, run 12, is with the slip-on installed, and it makes a hell of a lot more than the stock system did with proper tuning in place. In fact, if we highlight kind of the meat of the mid-range there, right about 6,800, 6,900 RPMs, we've picked up about 4 foot-pounds of torque and about 5 horsepower from the stock exhaust system being tuned versus the slip-on with proper tuning. And honestly, that's actually more than I expected to see, because the stock header design on these bikes is absolutely terrible. And again, I'm not going to dive back into that now because we've already covered it in the previous video, but they fucking suck. And when you get rid of those for a properly designed aftermarket header, things really open up. You can see there, if you take a look at the purple line, run 21, the performance improvements are enormous everywhere. We're now making 86 pound-feet of torque to the tire on pump gas and 140 horsepower to the tire. And that is finally starting to approach the performance levels that I was hoping we would see out of this platform. Again, these are not ZX-10s. This is a sport touring bike. The 140 to 150 horsepower range is kind of what this segment makes. But we are so massively improved over stock now that it's actually pretty funny when you overlay the stock graph versus the full exhaust with our custom tuning graph and get rid of the other crap so you can kind of see the differences for yourself. Out there at the top end, right around 10,000, 10,100 RPMs, that is a 20 horsepower gain from just an exhaust and proper tuning. And even if we highlight just a section of the mid-range there, again, right around 7,000 RPMs, you're gaining a massive 10 pound-feet of torque. Again, the dyno graph doesn't really do it justice because having ridden this thing now with that exhaust system installed, it doesn't even feel like the same bike. This does not in any way, shape, or form resemble the performance or the throttle smoothness or obviously the sound of a bone stock 25 Ninja 1100. It is truly better in every single measurable way with a full exhaust and proper tuning in place, which is exactly how I'd recommend that you guys modify them. It is such an enormous improvement that honestly, in my opinion, you're kind of crazy not to. Now, let's get to kind of the elephant in the room here, because we obviously fitted a Akrapovic full system from the previous generation bike, which fits fine from a fitment standpoint. You won't have to do any kind of bracket modification or anything like that, but you can't just slap it on there and expect the bike to be happy. So here's the problem. The front O2 sensor is something we've come very used to dealing with. You just remove them because, well, you're removing the stock exhaust anyway, and there's no reason to have a tiny narrowband O2 sensor that isn't really capable of any accurate fuel trims anyway in place. The rear O2 sensor is the bigger problem. Because again, if you were to just install this on one of the old bikes, you would just go ahead and thread this into the old exhaust system. No big deal. There's nowhere on those exhaust systems for a second O2 sensor to go, and I don't actually think that many of the aftermarket exhaust manufacturers are even going to try to put a provision in there for it, because there's no catalyst material for this to actually monitor in any of those aftermarket systems. Which means that even if they give you a place to thread in the second sensor, it really won't matter, because the ECU is going to detect that all of a sudden there is no catalyst material in there. Its whole job is to monitor catalyst efficiency, and then it will throw a check engine light. And the aftermarket isn't really interested, at least in the motorcycle industry, in adding catalyst material to these systems because they're not legal for road use anyway. All this stuff is for off-road use only and for racing. So that means if you're going to get an aftermarket full system for your bike, which again, from a performance standpoint, is a no-brainer in my opinion. The performance improvements are massive. You will have to have someone like us flash the ECU. There is no way around it, unless you want to live with a check engine light being on the dash, which, by the way, on all these Euro 5 and Euro 5 Plus models, completely disables dash control and all your rider aids. So it's just not an option. In fact, I would have actually had the tuning already released for this bike last week for the full Acura and for the Acura slip-on systems, but I couldn't because we had to work through those fault codes with the software developers to find them, isolate them in the bin file, and then be able to disable them in the software, which we can now do. So regardless of what exhaust system you put on the bike, we can now shut off that rear O2 catalyst monitor or O2 sensor fault code, as well as the normal front O2 sensor that we have to disable because you gotta yank them both on these anyway for things to run properly. Now, the way that this bike sits right now is not at all where we're going to stop with tuning development. We have a lot more planned for R&D for these Ninja 1100s than where we're currently at. I simply wanted to start with a full Acura system because it's an incredibly popular choice for folks that had the prior generation Ninja 1000s, but there's a few other full systems now that we'll be going ahead and ordering, fitting onto the bike, and building custom ECU mapping for, and obviously sharing those results with you guys. There's also quite a bit of intake testing I want to do on this bike because the intake really didn't change from the Ninja 1000. The air filter is even the same part number, so I've gone ahead and got an aftermarket air filter and even got some velocity sacks I'm going to play with as well to see if we can suck a little bit more power out of the top end without hurting the mid-range too much. So, as always, follow along on all our social media platforms. I'll be posting all of our testing and tuning results for this brand new Ninja 1100 platform on our social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, every single week as we go through testing and tuning on these new bikes. And if you do have one of these new 25 Ninja 1100s, feel free to purchase our mail-in ECU flashing service at twheeldynoworks.com. It is on our site for $349.99. We will always flash and return ship ECUs the very same day that we receive them. And if you have any questions whatsoever about getting your new Ninja 1100 properly tuned and dialed in, do not hesitate to email us at support@twheeldynoworks.com. I personally answer all the tech support questions that we receive every single day that we are open, and we are truly always happy to help.